Stay away from ruins of the Inquisition. This all happened about 5 years ago. One night, a few of my friends decided after a night of hanging out that we'd go on an adventure at about 3 a.m. We took a ride about 50 miles to this old Spanish ruin in New Mexico. That was once the seat of the Inquisition. I can't for the life of me remember what the place is called. So we jumped the front gate to the place and start exploring. One of my friends brought a flute with him, and he started playing it, and about 30 seconds into his mediocre playing, something started screaming really, really loud on the tops of the lawn-destroyed walls of the place. It was going from wall to wall really quick, screaming the most blood-curdling scream you've ever imagined. We noped the F out of there. One of my friends pissed his pants and drove for a few hours to Bandelier National Monument, where we planned to camp out at for the rest of the weekend. We got to Bandelier at probably like 6 or 7 a.m. and set up our camp. After a few hours just talking about what the hell happened at the ruins, I went to take a piss behind what was probably only 300 feet from our camp. This is where everything starts getting a little fuzzy. I remember seeing 2 dust devils coming my way, and when I turned around again, 2 of my friends were there, and they were motioning me to follow them. I couldn't help but to follow them, like I was being pulled behind them in shackles. I followed them for what seemed like 10 or 15 minutes, and then I snapped out of it. These weren't my friends. They had bright red hair, with my friends' faces and cat eyes. Both of these friends were brunette. I stopped walking, and they looked at me with probably the most terrifying gaze I've ever seen. Monsters in movies are nothing compared to this. I turned around and ran as fast as I could back the way I came from. After like 5 minutes of a full sprint, I got back to that rock that I pissed at and found our camp. Everyone was there, still sitting around talking, and didn't even notice that I was gone. I told them what happened with the look-alike Skinwalkers, and we packed up everything and left probably within like 10 minutes and got the hell back to Albuquerque. Convinced I saw a Skinwalker. As many of you might already know, many Navajo people, including my own family, are very reluctant to speak about Skinwalkers because it's believed to attract their attention. While I, however, grew up away from the Navajo Nation and was naive about the subject. When it came to Skinwalkers, I was an absolute skeptic. My mom used to tell a story of how back in the 80s, when she lived with her siblings and her grandparents, still in Shiprock, but the southern outskirts, about how she and my aunt saw a Skinwalker just outside their driveway under a streetlight. She described it as a black dog with dirty fur, a twisted noodle-like front leg, and these unnatural eyes with a soft burnt orange glow. Me, being my own close-minded self, doubted every word, but I never said my doubts aloud. But these doubts totally changed last year when I went to my grandparents' house last October. Me and my family had just finished scourging the carnival at the Navajo Nation fair and called it night. The house was close enough where we could walk home in just 10 minutes, so we did. When we got there, it was about 9 at night when we stayed up until about 2, catching up about family affairs in the local news. It was during that time that I just decidedly opened my mouth and blurted out the question, "Hey, are Skinwalkers real?" "Guys," I asked. "You shouldn't be speaking about that," my grandma said, with almost a disturbed yell in her voice. So she and my grandfather both decided to go to bed. After being scolded by my mom, one of my aunts chimes in with a very cautious tone and says, "They're real all right. Had a few start screaming outside my trailer in Farmington just a few nights ago. Your cousin had nightmares the whole night and woke up crying that morning." Not wanting to push the discomfort any further, we all decided to go to bed. Now, the trailer home is pretty old, and it was a really nice night, so we slept with the windows open with screens to prevent bugs coming in. Everyone had drifted off to sleep except me, because my mind was still going a million miles a minute about Skinwalkers, and wondered if I ever encountered one while here on the reservation. As a kid, I was told it's taboo to think about Skinwalkers, because it can still call their attention. That's when the shit totally hit the fan. Just as I was settling and finally getting relaxed to sleep, I started to hear something moving outside. I get up from the couch and start wandering over to the kitchen window. In the trailer, all of the rooms have the lights out, so the only visible light that can be seen is from the porch light out front. I was thankful of this because I told myself if it really was a skinwalker outside, then hopefully it wouldn't notice me seeing it. So I muster up the courage and take a quick scan outside. From the porch light, all I can see is the dusty ground and the vehicles that my family drove along with some old metal trash cans that stood beside the road. Looking for about a good 5 seconds, I wasn't able to see anything, so I was getting ready to turn around and walk back into bed, thinking it was just a stray cat or something. Only to have taken 2 steps, I hear what sound like a distorted scream coming from outside. Definitely close by. Fear rising, I look outside again, and there I see it. A coyote-like figure was staring in my direction from behind the cars, just outside the reach of the porch light. Only it looked awfully wrong, and gave off an evil vibe just from seeing it. It was gray with very disheveled hair, and a horrific orange-red glow. Orange-red soft glow came from its eyes. I noped the hell out of there, and ran back to the bedroom. It was at this moment I had begun to notice an awful stench in the air that smelled like rotting meat. I started trying to wake up my mom, who was like, "OMG, it's almost 3 a.m. What do you want?" I immediately began in a shaken voice, "There's something scary outside." Then she said, now annoyed because I woke her up, "Ugh, it's probably just a stray animal or something. It's the res. Animals wander all the time at night." She obviously wasn't getting the drift of what I was saying, so I screamed, "There's some Blair Witch Project shit going on outside, Mom." That got her attention. What the hell are you talking about?" she said. Then we heard it. The thing outside started making more of its dreadful like screams and started what sounded like thrashing outside on the ground. Hear that? That's what I'm talking about. So both her and me got back up, looked outside the window, and the coyote thing was making its way to the door. It walked with an old limp and dragged its back right leg as if it was handicapped. We could hear it start to scratch against the door and make this odd muffled moaning sound. My mom went to get my dad, and they both started shouting in Navajo all sorts of words, telling the thing to go away and saying it's not welcome here. Well, all this commotion was enough to get the rest of the trailer up as they came out into the hallway. The only thing my mom did was turn to them and said, "Skinwalker," while proceeding to point to the door, noises still happening. Apparently they already knew exactly what to do, as my grandfather got out a handgun from a drawer and a bag of ashes. He coated a few bullets and loaded them into the gun and went straight to the door. Yelling out more Navajo that was too fast for me to comprehend, he swung open the door and fired twice. Nothing. The thing managed to escape before my grandpa could put a bullet in it. "That's the fastest one I've ever seen," said my grandpa. Next thing you know, my aunts and my parents are freaking out about what just happened, saying stuff like, "What if it comes back tomorrow and it saw us? Does that mean we're targets now?" Afterwards, my grandparents calmed everyone down, myself included, saying we'll be fine, and we all went to bed around 3-ish. Morning comes, and my grandparents called one of their neighbors and explained to them what happened. Apparently, one of them was a medicine man who used to partake in yebiches, Navajo ceremonies used for healing and curing sickness, and came over to bless each family member in the grounds outside. Say their name and it will kill them. We live in a rural community on the Navajo reservation. My aunt and her 2 brothers were home alone while my grandparents had left for the evening to attend a chapter house meeting. They were in the house, and like many people from the reservation, they didn't have electricity. It had been dark outside for about an hour, and my aunt and my uncles were getting ready for bed. Outside, they heard noises, as if someone moving things around outside. My oldest uncle went to look out the front window and saw a figure out by the truck. This was immensely out of the ordinary because the closest neighbor was miles away. Whatever it was opened the truck door and began to dig through the personal items that my family had left in the vehicle. My aunt and uncles were frightened by the sight and knew that they should take action. They took out their rifle and all steadied themselves to hold it up. They flung open the door and aimed the gun at the dark figure. The figure turned and started to walk towards them, totally unfazed by the weapon. My uncle pulled the trigger, but nothing happened. The figure drew closer, and my aunt began to smell something like a rotting corpse. It was so strong it made her gag. My uncle continued to pull the trigger, with no luck, and the figure came closer and closer. Off the distance, headlights were coming up the road. My grandparents were returning. The figure looked toward the lights and started to move away and tucked itself behind a tree near the house. My oldest uncle ran toward the truck with the gun. My grandfather got out of the car and my uncle pointed to the tree. The thing was poking out its head to observe what they were doing. My grandfather ran into the house and over to the stove and grabbed a handful of ashes and rubbed over the gun and placed an ash-covered bullet into the chamber. We walked out onto the porch and fired toward the tree. Whatever that thing was, it didn't expect the gun to run off. The gunshot echoed and the dark figure began running. My grandma chased my aunt inside and my uncles and my grandfather went after it. There wasn't many roads or paths, so as my grandfather and uncles chased after the figure, the truck was bouncing and the headlights were not fixed on one particular spot. My uncle swears that whenever the headlights would hit the figure, he saw a woman. Not only that, whoever it was running on all fours like a bear. My grandfather eventually stopped the truck, and as they neared the ditch that drops about 20 feet, he got out and began to yell in Navajo. My uncle says that he was yelling about a local woman. He yelled that he wasn't scared and that he knew it was her and to leave his family alone. A few days passed, and there was news that the woman that my grandfather was yelling about had passed. I've always been told that if you know who the Skinwalker is, say their name and it will kill them. It nearly got him and his brother. This is my father's story, written from his perspective. When I was about 11 or 12, we lived in a small house made of mud and stone, a lot like our house now. It was two of my brothers and I in that house. Everyone else had gone to the Jamez feast and left us to tend the sheep. We were getting ready for bed when we heard the dogs going crazy outside. Thinking it was nothing more than coyotes howling in the distance, we told them to be quiet. We began to drift off into sleep and the dogs would not shut up. Somehow I was able to go to sleep for the next few hours. Then I woke up very late in the night. It was very quiet and still in the house, save for my brother snoring and breathing. I realized I needed to use the outhouse and woke up my brother to take me there. He teased me about being scared, which I certainly was. We went out with our flashlight to the outhouse. The dogs began their crazy barking out in the sagebrush, going from one place to the next. My brother went first, and I waited outside for him. While waiting, I tried to follow the dogs with my flashlight. Suddenly, there was a very loud whine from one of the dogs. Then everything went quiet again. It was really too quiet for that time of year. Not even the sheep were making noise. Suddenly, I heard a few of the dogs going completely mad by the truck. When I looked over, there was this man. He was unbelievably tall, leaning one arm on the cab roof of the truck. He was looking at the dogs for a little, and then suddenly kicking one of them. They all scattered in different directions. The thing looked up at me and I saw its face. It had a pure white face, like a full moon, 2 burning red eyes, and a slight smile that was pure black. I could not move or make a sound. It began to walk toward me with long strides, until it finally towered over me. All I began to see was a dark red, like the color of the blood when you cut the throat of a sheep. I kept getting deeper and deeper into its eyes. I could faintly hear my brother coming out of the outhouse. With this, the thing looked up at him. Reality came rushing back to me. I noticed that my brother was too distracted with his buckle to realize what was going on. I also noticed this thing's long hands hovering just inches from my head. Its skin was black ash, and he smelled like a bloated dead animal in summer. I was still unable to move or speak. The Skinwalker began to move toward my brother. Finally noticing this figure, my brother became paralyzed as I was. Closer and closer it drew, reaching an arm out toward my brother's head. Something finally snapped at me. I became unbearably angry. I broke from the trance and lunged at the Skinwalker, raising my arms like a wild animal and baring my teeth at it. A growl came out that I never knew I could make. I became more and angrier at the thing that was trying to hurt us. I kept that smile at first, but the angrier I got, the more the smile faded. Finally, with everything I had, I began to make this primal roar at it. It fell backwards and ran away into the night. Looking back at me, its eyes were dim and dull, its smile now long since gone. The next morning, the family returned home from the feast. After relaying this story to my parents, they quickly hired a medicine man. an attack on a party van. Whenever my mom would take us on a road trip to her hometown on the Navajo reservation, I'd occasionally ask her to tell me a Skinwalker story along the way. I remember every story she's told me was when we were driving through miles of nothing at night. Luckily, nothing ever happened to us during these drives. Anyways, this is one of those stories, and it came from my uncle. So my auntie and some of her friends used to party a lot back in the day. They'd hop in a beaten-down van, drive out to the boondocks, and just drink and have fun. Of course, this all took place on the Navajo reservation after sunset. On this particular night, that's when they were doing. Everything was going good and whatnot, when all of a sudden they hear what sounds like rocks being thrown at their van. Everyone gets quiet as they wonder what the hell is going on. The sounds of rocks being thrown stops, and then suddenly something jumps on top of the van roof. I should mention my family owned a white van, and we would use for road trips because it had enough room for all of my brothers and me. So imagine young me being told the story in a van. Terrifying. Everyone starts panicking as the realization sets in, and hurry to lock all the doors. My auntie jumps to the driver's seat and tries to start the engine. Of course, the beaten-down van then refuses to start. Whatever is on the roof is still making banging noise at this point, like it's jumping up and down. My auntie is freaking out when she then sees a hand with long nails reach over the roof and start scratching the windshield. At this point in the story, my mom would take one hand off the steering wheel and scratch the windshield to stimulate it. Then, whatever was on the roof jumps off. Everyone is still freaking out, yelling at my auntie to start the van, and she keeps trying. That's when she sees the Skinwalker walk up to the driver's side window and stare at her with a few inches away. Well, that's when my auntie jumped in the back and started praying for her life. Minutes pass, and the Skinwalker appears to leave. My auntie hops back in the driver's seat and gets the van to start, and off they go.